I flew from Frankfurt International Airport to Pulkov Airport in St. Petersburg, with a short layover in Riga. I arrived in Russia slightly after midnight, with my luggage also finding its way there. David flew from Malta and arrived some 5 hours later, finding me asleep behind the staircase. The joys of traveling. It also took him a while to wake me up. We took a 30-minute ride to our accommodation in central St. Petersburg, and we immediately went down to explore the city. St. Petersburg completely exceeded our expectations. It's full of elaborate architecture and it's impressively clean. The people are friendly, which might not have been what we expected, given that our only previous exposure to Russians was as villains in Western movies. We started off with the monument to Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, a Russian poet that sits in Art Square, right in front of the State Russian Museum, which is what we see now. The museum was built by Nicholas II in 1895. It houses an impressive art collection. Not far is the monument to Catherine the Great. Now let's take a quick heli flight over the city. Kidding, it's footage from my drone. The city is lined with small canals that add to its charm. One such canal leads to the Church of Our Savior on Spilled Blood, which is dedicated to the assassination of Alexander II. Its colorful Russian Revival style contrasts to the neoclassical style of the State Russian Museum next door. And if you're having issues with any Russian poltergeist, here is the solution for you. The monument to Peter I is a bronze equestrian monument of Peter the Great. It sits in front of St. Michael's Castle. We spent quite a lot of time watching the river boats just sail by. It's really peaceful. The Summer Garden was designed as a garden of fountains by Peter I and was meant to mimic the opulent gardens built by monarchs in Europe. Palace Square is the city's central square, dominated by the sweeping Alexander Column. It has been the site of key historical events, including imperial ceremonies and the 1917 Russian Revolution. St. Petersburg's most famous building, the Winter Palace, not only physically dominates Palace Square and the south embankment of the Neva River, but also plays a central political, symbolic and cultural role in the 3-century history. On the opposite side of the river, we find the place where the city of St. Petersburg began, the Peter and Paul Fortress. The fortress never actually saw military action. St. Peter and Paul Cathedral, with its tall golden spire, is the highlight of the fortress. Its bells can be heard from the distance. Moving further along the same bank of the river, we find the Standard, which is an exact replica built in 1999 of the original frigate built by the Peter the Great in 1703. A few steps away on Trinity Square is the Temple Chapel of the Holy Trinity. This is where David tried to domesticate a couple of unicorns with very little success, as you can see. From here, we can see how the gilded dome of St. Isaac's Cathedral dominates the skyline of St. Petersburg. Built between 1818 and 1858, the facade is decorated with sculptures and massive granite statues, each made of a single piece of red granite. Here is St. Petersburg's most famous public monument, the equestrian statue to Peter the Great. The Admiralty building was originally a shipyard, but later transformed into Grand Naval Headquarters. The Smolny Cathedral is a stunning example of Baroque architecture with light blue walls and ornate white details. St. Isidore Church was built in the early 20th century for the Estonian Orthodox community. Someone was definitely enjoying the city tour. Food in most restaurants was good. Here we are enjoying pelmeni and kinkali with various fillings. And now one last view of St. Petersburg from above before we head into the mountains. We took a 3-hour flight to Mineralnye Vody, which is the Russian gateway to the Caucasus Mountains. During the flight, we could already get a glimpse of the mountain range. A driver picked us up and helped us load our bags into the car for a 3-hour drive to Terskol. At one point we stopped in this abandoned area and we were sure we were going to get kidnapped. Luckily it was just for refueling. Eventually we made it to Terskol. Sitting at 2,100 meters, it is a small settlement in the Kabardino-Balkaria region of Russia. It serves as the main base for Southside expeditions, with access to cable cars, mountain huts and trailheads for acclimatization hikes. We visited the monument to the fallen soldiers of World War II who defended Elbrus from the Nazi invasion. The next day we went for an acclimatization hike up to Maiden Braids waterfall. No need to deny it, at some point we also wish we were riding horseback. The trail was pleasant with great vistas of the valley below. It did get steeper as we progressed. From higher above, we got our first view of the mountain we would be climbing. Here clearly visible, its two peaks. After around 4 hours, we reached the waterfall at an elevation of 2,800 meters. The Maiden Braids, fed by the Gara-Bashi glacier, gets its name from its many tiny streams, which look like braided hair. We were cautioned that the water would be extremely cold, yet we went ahead and immersed ourselves in the rushing flow. Once we had dried off, we headed back to the valley. Our guide, for some unknown reason, chose a shorter but steeper path, which turned out to be a poor choice. It was slippery and left our quads extremely sore the following day. We kept descending until we made it back to our guest house in the valley. The following day, the guide and I went on another short hike, while David had to head into the city to get his entry permit reissued after the guest house misplaced it. The trail ran very close to the border with Georgia. The forest looked alive with all the butterflies flying around. And in the evening, the sunset added an extra layer of beauty to the scenery. Later on, we prepared the equipment we would be taking with us up to the mountain. This being our first experience, we had many doubts on what we needed and what we didn't need. We rented plastic boots. They were terribly uncomfortable and gave us painful blisters. Lesson learned. We bought our own boots for the next one. With everything packed, we took the Terskol Gara-Bashi cable car, leading to the Gara-Bashi station. Make sure to wear more clothes as there is a big drop in temperature from the valley to these higher altitudes, and the chairlifts are totally exposed to the weather. The cable car has 4 stations in total. The starting point, Krugozor at 3000 meters, Mir Station, which we see now at 3455 meters, and here is Gara-Bashi at 3847 meters. This is the final station. By the way, this is Europe's highest cable car. A 40-minute walk led us to our hut, which you can see on the left. Now we see the famous barrels, simple metal shelters used by climbers for rest, acclimatization and emergency refuge at high altitude. They are lightweight, easy to transport and provide basic protection against the extreme weather found on the south side of the mountain. Some modern Russian art installation just outside our huts. We were situated opposite the barrels. The view is breathtaking. Now a little less so as we see David walking out of the dining hut. The huts are simple on the inside and house 8 bunk beds. At least they are equipped with electricity, and there was also an electric heater which made the room nice and toasty. I had a slight headache because of the rapid altitude gain. The dining area was also basic, but the food was always tasty and nutritious. The next morning we set off for an acclimatization hike. Along the way we made sure to have fun. And secretly we both hoped the other would slip into the cold stream. But none of us did. From higher up we could clearly see the 2 dormant volcano summits, with the right one being the highest. The route goes across a gentle snow plateau and then a steeper snow ramp at roughly 20 degrees. Here we could definitely start to feel the effects of altitude. Every so often we would stop for a snack and to give our bodies time to adjust to the higher altitude. The weather wasn't great and clouds started rolling in. We hiked for about 3 hours, going slightly above the diesel hut, but not managing to reach the Pastukhov Rocks, which are the usual turnaround at 4600 meters. At the top of the screen, you can see the diesel hut, which was built in 2001, where the generator of the burned down Priut 11 stood. The Priut 11 fire incident happened in 1998 when a tourist misused the stove and burned the place to the ground. Here we see other mountaineers hiking up to the Pastukhov Rocks. We had planned the rest day for the morning after, but inclement weather conditions forced us to attempt to summit and to use the snowcat to gain some ground quickly, as the weather was expected to get much worse during the day. We set off at around 2 AM with the snowcat taking us up to around the altitude we had reached the previous day. Once daylight caught up with us, we could already see the summit up there, but it feels like it never gets any closer. This section is steep, but the snow was grippy and not too icy yet. Here we're roughly level with the east summit at 5,621 meters. The air feels thin. Getting to the west summit felt unbelievable. It was this mix of accomplishment, joy and awe at the views around us. Everything you hope for when you dream about reaching a mountain's top. This was my first summit experience. Many mistakes were made, but many lessons learned. From equipment choices to opting for reputable guides. On the descent, the wind picked up even more. In fact, we turned out to be some of the last people to reach the summit for the next 4 days. On the way down, we picked up our backpacks and trekking poles from below the Pastukhov Rocks. We had left them there as we swapped to our ice axes. We continued descending steadily. It took us around 4.5 hours to reach the hut. The next day we descended back to the valley. Here you can see the technique for taking the chairlifts. Quickly jump on and pray. The next day we flew to Moscow and spent a couple of days sightseeing. Here we start with the Kotelechnesaya embankment building directly on the Moskva River. Red Square and St. Basil's Cathedral are must-see highlights in Moscow, celebrated for their stunning architecture and captivating colors. Street performance added to the magical atmosphere. GUM, the largest department store in Russia, dating back to the days of the Tsars, is located opposite the Kremlin in Red Square. This is the State Historical Museum in Red Square, known for its deep red facade and striking neo-Russian architectural style. The Kremlin, with its iconic red walls, stands as a powerful symbol of Russia's history and leadership. Spasskaya Tower is the most famous entrance to the Kremlin, easily recognizable from its iconic clock. Whilst Cathedral Square is the spiritual segment of the Kremlin. It includes several enormous cathedrals. The historic Gara-Bashi Square looks magical in the evening. For our last night, we had dinner inside Bunker 42, a former Cold War nuclear bunker. Its entrance, with the iconic large green blast door and with a red star, leads 65 meters underground into the old Soviet command facility. Now it houses a posh bar and restaurant. And that's how we ended our Soviet adventure. If you enjoyed watching, like and subscribe not to miss any of my other adventures.